too.
We can see a countdown.
Yeah.
Live, it says.
It says live. Damn, again. Here we are. It's turned up. We're there. Fantastic.
Yay!
Hello.
Hello. Well, welcome you both. Thank you so much for turning up for a tea time chat. Lucy Foley, author of The Guest List and The Hunting Party. Paul Burston, many strings to your bow, but your latest book is The Closer I Get. I think that's your latest, isn't it, Paul?
It is, yeah.
So the idea is really, I'm just going to chat to you a little bit, find out what we're doing at 4 o'clock on a self-isolating afternoon. So have you been writing today, folks?
I've done a bit of writing. I've got to actually, my editor, in case my editor watches this, yes, I've been writing all day since 6 in the morning. I keep getting distracted by like all the WhatsApp messages and all the kind of memes going around as well. There's a lot of memes going around, I find, coronavirus memes.
Okay, Paul, have you got anything done?
I've done a little bit of sort of, plotting. I haven't done any proper writing today. And no, I'm finding it very difficult actually at the moment, because I'm finding that the wider world is just crushing in all the time, and it's really difficult to get the headspace to focus on things.
There's a lot of wider world around at the moment, it has to be said, isn't there?
Totally. And I don't know if you're finding, but I'm finding that the book that I'm writing actually at the moment, so it's unlike the first two, it's not set in like an isolated place. It's set in Paris, so in the middle of a city. And it just feels really weird to be writing about somewhere where people are going to bars and they're going to restaurants and they're kind of in big groups. It just feels really strange.
I'm really paranoid about that. I'm really paranoid about what world our books are going to be published in. And I'm trying to write sort of contemporary fiction that reflects the real world, but I don't feel I know what the real world is right now, or that and it will be at all relevant. So maybe I need to set everything in the past. Maybe it's maybe historical fiction is the next hot thing, and I missed that boat.
I find at the moment that the last few weeks, did you watch Years and Years, the Russell T Davies drama earlier in the year?
Yeah.
At the time it felt like so prophetic, and now it feels like historical document. It feels like everything that was in there has happened and more. And I don't know how on earth one can possibly write about this moment at the moment. It's just too close, I think.
Yeah.
I think it'll be written about in years to come. People will write about it looking back on it.
Definitely.
I think that's part of it, isn't it? I remember sitting to a panel where a whole lot of Northern Ireland writers talked about why there had been no fiction written about Northern Ireland for so long. And now, of course, there's lots of it now. But it took at least a decade before anybody could process it into kind of the story and tell. And I think there is that kind of distance. I don't think we can leave in there and just sort of write this stuff from nowhere.
No, I think that's right. But I do think there will be a lot of coronavirus novels penned in time. And I think, you'll have kind of self-isolation romance probably and all sorts going on.
Yeah, there will be.
Much potential.
My God, there's a genre there. I hadn't figured that out.
You've Got Mail. It'll be like a new version of You've Got Mail.
Yeah, Sleepless in Seattle type,
Let's start by talking a bit about your books. Can I start with you, Paul? Because The Closer I Get is actually, in some ways, a classic psychological fiction book, but it's not. It also takes it in completely different ways. It behaves kind of differently. There's different, it really concentrates. There's a couple of characters in it, Tom and Evie, and in some ways, like in classic, psychological fiction, you like neither of them, but they both got aspects and things like that. But it's exploring stuff that I think that psychological fiction hasn't done before. Did you feel about that when you're writing it?
To be honest with you, I wasn't really conscious of what the genre was or what the expectations were. Because it came from a true life experience, because it was inspired by something that happened to me. It was just me sort of processing that in a way, I think. It's something that happened some years ago. And I wanted to write about intimacy and about how people present themselves online and how different that may or may not be to who they really are, because that's a world that I inhabit a lot. I inhabit the online world a lot, and I find it fascinating how people behave and interact online. So it came from there, really. It didn't really come from observing what the sort of rules were or anything. I think it probably came instinctively because I read so much of this stuff. So obviously it's embedded in my subconsciousness. So it sort of came through. And by the time I got towards the end, I kind of knew what I was doing, or at least on the first draft, obviously. And then I started to play with it. So I sort of made a few little nods to classics of the genre along the way, in a quite a knowing way to the reader. So there's little hints at Misery, and there's little hints at various books and movies, and lots of Madonna.
Yes. Where did that come from, Paul? By any
Well, you know, she cast a long shadow over my life as Madonna, so that felt appropriate. But no, it was really me exercising a demon, you know. Really,
right. Because it had obviously personal sort of aspects to it, in that, you know, there's a stalker element into it, and that kind of obsessive relationship. But this was something that happened to you.
Yes, I had a situation with somebody online that ended up going to court, and they were convicted of harassment, and it stopped then after their conviction. But it was only afterwards that I discovered, sort of reading up on it, that so many people that are given restraining orders breached them. It's something like 42%. And at the time, and it still is quite new, I think. I think the courts are catching up a bit now, but a few years ago they were really slow. We had to have someone in court to explain to the judge what Twitter was and how it worked. They didn't even know what it was. And so consequently, the sort of sentences doesn't really reflect how much that impacts on your life. In my case, you know, the person was convicted, restraining order was given, and I heard nothing more from them. But there was another target as well, and this person continued targeting that other person. And I was left thinking, what would I have done had that been me? Because by the time it got to court, it also takes so long. From the time you first report it to the actual court case, it takes forever. And by the time it got to court, I was literally, you know, I was not myself. I was a different person. I was so determined that this person had to be stopped. I would have done anything. Right. And there was part of my brain that was actually quite. I scared myself. Actually, I scared myself as to how vengeful I felt about it. So the book was kind of me sort of taking that dark element of my own psyche, really, and sort of projecting it into a story and thinking, well, what would I have done had this not stopped, and who would I have become as well.
I'm always terrified of that write what you know kind of idea, because I think that's really hard. But this was right. Was that part of it, working through it, to actually give yourself your sanity back?
Oh, completely. Because I mean, there was a long period after the case was over where I was in complete denial about the fact that I was traumatized by it. I refused to go to see victim support. I refused to accept that I was a victim. I hated being thought of as a victim. I always have done. And I was in denial. And this went on for months. And eventually I realized I needed help. And I went and got help. And I was still carrying an awful lot of anger around it. And I knew that at some point, as a writer, I would process it in some way. I didn't know that it would end up being a novel, but I knew I would write about it in some way, because I also write journalism and other bits and pieces. But then when I had the idea for the story, it really came because I had this voice in my head, which was this very, very heavily fictionalized version of the person that stalked me. And I thought, if I write this book, it needs to be written largely from their point of view, in the first person, and I need to put myself in the head of the target rather than the victim.
Right.
That was obvious to me. That was a way of me processing and taking power back, and also finding empathy and sympathy, and therefore letting go. You know, because it's much easier to feel pity and sympathy for somebody, which is how I feel about it now, than to be feeling so angry and resentful about how this person disrupted your life. You know, it could have been a lot worse. Thankfully, it wasn't. But it was very disruptive. It did cause me mental health problems. It did, you know, cause huge trauma, and it was a way of working through that, I guess. I don't normally do that in my fiction. I normally write things that are completely separate from my life. This one crept up on me, you know.
But did that make the whole thing about the critical reaction to it quite nerve-wracking? Because in a weird way, they're talking about quite a personal point of view. You must have been quite worried when it was coming out about how it was going to go down.
I was, yes. I was, yes. And the first event that I did, which was Newcastle Noir back in May last May, and the first panel I was on to talk about the book, and the chair asked, or a member of the audience asked the question, "Are you not concerned that having written this book, you may rekindle this person's interest in you?" And I hadn't even thought of that. It didn't even cross my mind. I was like, "Oh my god."
Very good point.
Yeah, so then I went and did some Googling and found out that they wouldn't be bothering me because they're where they should be at the moment, which is in a secure place. So it's all sorted out. But But yeah, I mean, I was worried about the reaction because it is personal, and even though I'm not Tom, and Tom is kind of based on many people that I've met and characters that I've encountered over the years, and bits of me and bits of other people, whatever. I still felt that it was a very personal story, obviously. So you do take it to heart more, I think, if it's close to you, if it's closest to you.
Yeah.
If the closer it gets to you, the more you take it to heart.
I was going to turn to you, Lucy, with the guest list, which was out. Actually, it's quite recently, isn't it?
God, yeah, it feels like another world that it published into.
Really does, really does. But you and me were supposed to be on a panel at Killer Women, which was now, I think it was the Sunday before last, one of the first things that was being cancelled in this complete cascade of cancelling of live events. And it was going to be a panel about toxic masculinity. And there's a really peculiar but very realistic type of toxic masculinity that runs through the guest list. And that's a kind of public school manhood, isn't it? And it's a really, really dark kind of something that expresses itself as if it's the most fantastic thing in the world, isn't it? I mean, it's the real men together. We're all in this world having a great time kind of masculinity, but it's very dark in the guest list. Where does that come from?
Gosh, do you know, I mean, it's so funny. It's one of those things where it's sort of, you start following a thread, I think, sometimes when you're writing. And I was thinking about Will, the groom, and Jono, his best man, and the sort of men that they are. And I just got kind of more and more drawn into what had kind of forged this friendship between them, which is often a very uneasy friendship, and the sort of upbringing that they would have had. And the more that I researched this sort of specifically boys public school experience, and, you know, the fact that these kids would be sent off sometimes at the age of, you know, younger than 13, sometimes at 13, and just sort of expected, you know, be expected to kind of fend for themselves. Obviously very privileged, but at the same time, you know, having to kind of survive, having to repress emotion and things, and what that does to you as a human being. And, you know, there's a lot of that, I think, in our politics at the moment. There are a lot of kind of ex-boarding school people. And it makes you think, what does that do to you as an adult, you know, if you've sort of gone through that kind of upbringing, and that kind of cauterization of emotion and that almost inability to empathize. But then I was also, fascinated by the idea of all these guys coming together and being like, but it was the making of us, you know, it kind of made us as people. Yeah. And at the same time, this sort of bullying still continuing really in the group. You're in it or you're out of it. But at the same time, you don't really want to be in it. It's quite an uncomfortable place to be, I think.
You chose this island setting. I mean, it was obviously classic for the genre. It's nice nods to the kind of tradition that you're following in. But this was an island that you seem to know a little bit about yourself. I mean, this is a kind of, although it's that you've given it a made-up name, but there's a kind of real geography for you in it, isn't there?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So it's based very closely on several islands off the west coast of Ireland, so specifically off the Connemara coast. So places like Inishbofin and Inishturk, which are beautiful, but very remote and very wild. And actually, funny story, because normally the location comes absolutely first when I'm writing a book. But with this one, I knew that I wanted a wedding, and I knew I wanted it to be on an island. And I actually initially set it on a Greek island. I think I just wanted a research trip to Greece or something. I thought that'd be really and increasingly it just didn't feel right for this book. Like I needed that contrast to the kind of glamour of the wedding. I needed that darkness. And my editor actually pointed out in one of our chats, she said, it's all feeling, you know, the way you've described it, it's all feeling quite Mamma Mia, like having a wedding island, that whole thing.
And that wasn't what you're aiming for, really.
That wasn't what I was aiming for at all. And then I travelled to Connemara, where actually half my family are from, because I'm half Irish, and got a ferry out to the islands, which I'd never done before. And I just thought, wow, this setting is perfect, because some of them, so obviously Cormorant Island is fictional, but it's based very much on somewhere like Inishturk, which used to be inhabited. So there are all these old buildings there, which are now kind of the skeletons of these buildings. And it's very hard sort of standing there not to think of ghosts, you know, and the people who've left. And it's also very precarious. So there are these sort of steep cliffs, there's a peat bog, and you're kind of standing there looking west and you're looking out to the Atlantic, and there's nothing between you and North American continent, which is quite an eerie, isolating feeling, I think. So it just felt perfect for that.
I want to ask, actually, one of the things that really fascinated me with the hunting party, and this is a really weird thing and probably the terrible thing to say straight from the beginning, but I just loved the cover, and that's very shallow.
Me too. Yeah.
But it was also really great to have a hold on, I want to put it on screen here. I'm struggling. Here we go.
It's so with the blue. I like it with the blue.
I know, nice, isn't it? Blue and yellow, my favourite mixture. We get so stuck in the memes of what thriller colours are, don't we? I mean, we've seen the same things over again, and after a while, you begin to say, well, that's a good cover because it looks like a cover. What was so nice about this, when you walked into a bookshop and saw it on a shelf, it just screamed out at you because it was so different. Yeah. How did that come out? Did you have any, because you come from publishing as well, so presumably you had an idea on this yourself, or was it somebody else threw this into the mix?
Well, it was really funny. I mean, the publishers were really brave, actually, because they actually got me in and they showed me this like contact sheet of all the cover looks that they'd been sort of working on, the potential cover looks, and like there were quite a lot of women in the middle of a forest, in the middle of a snowy forest, wearing a red coat, which is a cover that feels quite familiar. But then there was this like, it was the kind of embryonic version of this cover, I think. And it was so weird because seeing it, I kind of been thinking like Deer Skull or something like that. But seeing it, it was like what was in my head, but a million times better. And I think that's the talent of the creatives at publishers, is that they can create something that is somehow speaks to you and is perfect, but is something completely new as well.
Yeah, it was brilliant. It was lovely to see. I saw Cressy's just said, you all have such posh living rooms. Yeah, but you should see the rest of our houses.
Totally. I've done it.
Actually, I don't work in this room. You should see where I work. I mean, God, it's a tip. This is why I moved my computer downstairs, just for this, to try and pretend I have a playroom. And that's going to be interesting over the next few weeks, isn't it? Because this is where we are now. This is where we have to be. How are you finding all that?
I mean, I feel like I'm pretty good at self-isolation anyway as an author. What do you reckon, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much, yeah. Although I do get a bit cabin fevery, and I do have to get out. I usually go to the gym, or I go for a run or a walk, or if I spend a lot of time in Hastings. If I'm there, I go and walk by the sea. So I'm finding sort of being in the house, because we made a decision 10 days ago just to stay in.
Yeah.
Once that even though we haven't been ill or anything, but we just thought, no, let's just stay in. So we've just stayed in. And you do get a bit. We've got a very small little back sort of courtyard garden, so we can get some sunshine. But I do feel a bit trapped already. I have to say, I do feel a bit like scratchy.
Yeah, and I guess it's the fact that normally, as authors, we might be hibernating inside, but we know we can go out if we want to. There's like the whole other world out there. We maybe choose not to, but it's there. Yeah.
You're both obviously very smartly dressed, which I presume you do every morning.
This is just an old jumper. This is not smart. And I've got slippers on. I could show, I've got these on my feet.
Oh, they look really warm.
They're really cozy, actually. Really nice.
I've made a vow I will shave every day, just to try, because it's quite easy to not, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? To think about.
I have a really, I'm very strong about that. There was actually a bit in the book that was edited out because it was just languorous. But there was a passage in the Closer I Get where Tom is getting ready to go out, and he goes into his head about how he always shaves every day, even though he works from home, because to him it's so important to maintain appearances. But I just think if I don't shave, or I don't sort of smarten myself up a bit, I just feel a bit like I'm not quite me, and I just get really kind of lazy and slovenly. And I think it's good for you psychologically to, make a bit of an effort in the morning.
Yeah,
also, I hate being stubbly anyway. I hate it. I've never been stubbly.
Me too.
What is this thing about women shaving their faces? Is this true? That I saw online yesterday about young women are being encouraged to shave the fine hair on their skin.
No.
Yeah, that's what I read.
But then it'll grow back thicker, won't it?
But exactly, that's what I thought. I mean, boys used to do that to make it grow back thicker when I was 12.
Another thing.
You'd all shave your bum fluff to try and make it.
Those days, we're living in strange times.
Oh very strange time.
Right.
Fake news. I'm calling that fake news.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe it's fake news.
It's
Maybe
a lot of that about.
How are you finding your reading mojo is doing? Mine has gone. Mine has got a bit. I think she means mine has gone a bit, but so's mine. I don't know about yours. I mean, I'm struggling with it over the last few days because I've got a lot of books to read.
Do you know, mine's been pretty good. I'm not sure my writing mojo's been great, but my reading, my like passive reading mojo's been all right. But I think it helps. I listen to stuff on audiobook, and I think that's kind of that much more passive. So you can sort of be doing it while you're wandering around and cooking and things. So I've been doing some of that. But I just read the new Kate Moss, which is coming out in May, and the Sarah Pinborough as well, Dead to Her.
Oh, I've read that.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Fabulous, yeah.
So good. It's such great escapism because it's so kind of sexy and like atmospheric and heady. Yeah.
I mean, I'm hearing that a lot of people, that reading, especially ebooks have gone through the roof over these last few days, and hopefully they have. I mean, I hope that people are sort of ordering from indie bookshops as well. I've been trying to include some of them in.
Yeah.
How's about you, Paul? As you're reading, I mean, in our position, you've always got a huge pile of stuff you want to and need to read.
I mean, yes. I mean, I'm reading Amanda. Oh God, my brain's gone now. I'm reading Amanda's new book. Who wrote The Cliff House?
Amanda Jennings.
Yeah.
Yes, Amanda Jennings. Sorry, which is fantastic. That's really, really good. I read the new Mark Edwards, which I really enjoyed. The House Share.
No. Oh yeah, I've got that. I've got
really enjoyed that.
In my pile. Yeah.
And now, because I won this prize, so we're calling for submissions at the moment. So my next sort of pile is going to be reading through all these prize submissions, so I'm going to be working. So, but I quite like that actually. I quite like that. I quite like being forced to read things that I wouldn't, maybe a bit outside my normal.
Yeah.
I tend to read within the genre that I write that we write in. I tend to read mostly crime fiction, so it's quite good to sort of be forced to read more widely.
Now you talked about the prize, and obviously that's the Polari prize you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, which is, and I should explain for anybody who hasn't made the connection or doesn't know about Polari that Paul created this event called Polari, which I think was must be 13, 14 years ago, was it you started it?
2007 it started.
2007. So quite good, 13, yeah. And it's been, it's a really massive thing. This is, I think, was that Polari in Heaven?
That was Polari in Heaven, yes.
That's amazing outfit.
I know.
That was our biggest event to date.
And rather fantastic thing to do. But can you just talk us through what Polari is? I think we've just lost Paul. Shocked by the Paul, come back. Shocked by the whole thing about Polari. But basically, Polari is about queer fiction. And hold on, I'll bring him back in now. He's coming back in 3, 2.
3, 2, 1. I'm back.
Polari is about queer fiction and celebrating it and initially creating a live space for it to exist in, wasn't it?
Yes, I mean it's a showcase for LGBT plus themed work and writers, and I started it really out of frustration because there are, in 2007 I published 4 non-fiction books and my 3rd novel had come out in 2007. And I got precisely 0 invitations to appear anywhere, to do anything with it. I was so cross about it. I'd missed History Month in February, which is when libraries need to tick that box. So it came out in May. So I just decided to start a little event. I was DJing at the time at a bar in Soho called the Green Carnation, which was dedicated to Oscar Wilde, the venue. And it had Oscar Wilde quotes on the walls. And I thought, I should put on a literary event here because it's so perfect. And I'll DJ and then we'll have a reader, a poet, an author. And it started really small. It was literally one person reading and me hosting and mostly music and just socializing. And about, a dozen people, 20 people maybe. And then it just grew month on month. And after about 3 months, it went crazy. It just got really, really, really busy. So we outgrew the venue. We moved to several other venues, and then we got invited to the South Bank, and we've been at the South Bank Centre since 2009. And we also tour, which is thanks to the Arts Council. Well, we normally tour. At the moment, we're not touring.
There's a picture of you. That's Polari in Heaven as well, which is a lovely shot of the audience. I reckon there's Laura Shepherd Robinson there in the audience. I don't know who else.
Yes, she was there. She was sitting in the front.
Oh yeah.
A great writer as well. But the prize has been really important as well. It kind of sets a stone for stuff like. And you've had some amazing prize winners as well over the years. I mean, it's quite some of the people you've spotted quite early in their career.
Well, I mean, because it's quite a broad prize. So it's basically a prize. The first book prize has been running since 2011, so that's for a debut, and it can be any type of book as long as it's someone's first book. So it can be poetry, it can be a memoir, it can be a novel. So we've had a really wide variety of winners. We've had poetry, we've had collections of short stories. Actually, when you were talking about Northern Ireland earlier on, Paul McVeigh won with The Good Son a couple of years ago, which was an amazing story about growing up in troubles as a young gay boy and told through the voice of an 11-year-old. It's an astonishing way of writing about that period in history. But we've had John McCulloch, the poet, won one year. We've had Kirsty Logan won. Mari Hannah, who everyone knows now, of course, she won with the first of her crime novels. And last year we added a prize for established writers because obviously there's such a huge focus on debuts, and I think it's important to also give an award to people who are maintaining a career in this very, very difficult market. And there's still, I think things have got a lot better since I started out. There's certainly much more awareness around diversity and all those issues in publishing now. But I still think it's an uphill struggle for LGBT themed work. Definitely, I think not being an LGBT writer is neither here nor there. But you still get people saying, "Does this character have to be gay? Does this woman have to be a lesbian?" Well, why? Why is that a question? Even So I think it's important to still sort of blaze a trail for that and wave a flag for those books and encourage those writers. We've had amazing support. FMCM Associates sponsor us. DHH Literary Agency sponsor us. WH Smith's Travel have been really supportive, showcasing the books every year. So it's been really, it's been a real project of a pet project of mine that I do for the love of it. But I get so much pleasure from seeing what it does for people and how much attention it brings to books that often get overlooked. In a very busy, loud market. And you'll get some. There's an amazing writer called Dirie Osman, who is a Somalian refugee who came to this country many years ago, and he published an amazing book called Fairy Tales for Lost Children, all about that experience, told through different voices, very, very queer voices. And that book winning the prize and getting the attention it got as a result was like such a proud moment for me, because that book, nobody knew about that book. Nobody was paying attention to that book. Yeah. Published by a very small independent press, wasn't getting the kind of distribution that it deserved. So it's really good to be able to shine a light on those voices and give them a platform.
I think it's you mentioned the whole thing about debuts, and obviously this is really interesting that the publishing industry has been used to having these levers to hand, and debuts is one of them that it uses because there's a freshness and excitement about anybody new, whereas the rest of us have been around a while. Yeah, they know exactly how much they think will sell and stuff like that. But suddenly they don't have that open to them. I think it's going to be a really weird time to be in publishing, isn't it? The normal memory of being able to publish their debuts and have them go out there, because they used to do that through shops, through the supermarkets. Suddenly that's not available. So it's going to be a really interesting few months. As somebody who worked in publishing themselves, Lucy, what do you think is going through people's heads at the moment? Is it just sort of like blind panic or what? I mean, it must be a fascinating time.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, I feel so out of it, because I am several years out of the industry. But I imagine, there's a lot of, I know there's been a lot of kind of contingency planning going on that I've heard about. And apparently people's workloads are kind of double, what they normally are, because they're just, I think publishers are trying to think about different ways of finding readers, kind of getting those the market. But it's so tricky. I mean, supermarkets are huge for our industry now. And they can be so important for distribution and the difference between a book being made or not. Even though we would all love to shop in, indie bookshops and get ourselves through there. But it's a really, really interesting time. I do feel really sorry, I think, if you've got a debut coming out now, it's really tough, because you deserve to have all that excitement and the kind of launch event and, doing your first few events. And I think, it's a real shame that that's being taken away from people. But hopefully, they'll realise how wonderful all of that is when this is lifted. And,
we're going to have such a party, I think, aren't we? Do you know what I mean? I'm already all the things we can do.
But there's also been wonderful support from, writers like, I saw David Nichols was saying he was throwing like Twitter launch parties for people on his feed. So things like that, I think that's brilliant. It's really brought out the best in the industry, I think, as well.
Brilliant. Listen, I've yacked on long enough. Just quickly, what are you both working on right now? What can we look forward to next?
Oh, let's go first.
Yeah, I should be doing that in a professional way, saying, Paul.
Okay. I'm working on my next novel for a render, and it's a psychological thriller, and it's set in Hastings, and it's very different to The Closer I Get. It's about a man who takes revenge on somebody for something that happened many years ago, and about the repercussions of that, of those actions, and how it impacts on other family members and people around him. So it's about it's a kind of cautionary tale, really, I suppose, about vengeance.
Very good.
Wow, that's good.
And how's about yourself, Lucy?
So I'm working. So this is the third murder mystery I'm writing. But if like The Hunting Party and The Guest List are in a sense sort of sister books because they're both set in very isolated settings. This is set in the middle of a city. So it's set in Paris, in one of those beautiful old apartment blocks. And all of the suspects in the murder are the inhabitants of this apartment block. So all of the different neighbours. So you've got kind of the little old lady with her dog. You've got kind of students on one floor, like the hot guy downstairs, the sort of very glamorous couple who throw lots of drinks parties for the neighbours and things. And they all become the suspects. And if you imagine one of those sort of apartment buildings where it's all kind of set around a courtyard, so everyone can kind of see into everyone else's apartment. A little bit rear window.
I was hoping when you were describing it, I was hoping for a really good stairwell at least.
Oh yeah, there's a good stairwell. There's one of those rickety old lifts, you know,
excellent.
Classic Parisian.
Oh, those doors.
There's like a carve, so you know, like where they would have had the wine back in the day, but it's just now where the bins are. But it's also this really kind of spooky space.
I love the way you've actually built it in 3D in your head. You know it all there.
I'm picturing it already. I'm actually picturing the hot guy downstairs as well.
So having a lot of fun with that. But as I say, it does feel very weird because probably if I were writing The Hunting Party or The Guest List, something like that, where everyone's isolated anyway and it's like the rest of the world is shut out, this is set in a city. So I'm writing about a city as well, and bars and people everywhere. And that feels very strange at the moment. But it's quite nice to be able to escape into that. You know, I mean, even if there's a murder, there is a murder and there's dark things going on, but you know.
No, I go for a drink. Sounds fantastic. Listen, it'll be great. I just want to quickly say over the next few days, what I've got coming up, I'm not quite sure when and which days. Tomorrow, though, I'm speaking to Githa Lodge, I hope. C.L. Taylor, we've got Anne Cleeves coming up, Peter May, Rebecca Bradley, and we've got a very nice woman from Cambridgeshire Libraries who's going to talk to us about how libraries are getting on under the circumstances, because it's just weird to have no libraries.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a strange thing going on. So hopefully all those will come, technology willing and schedule. I'm not quite sure when and where, but anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. It's no end.
Good.
Likewise. Gave me an excuse to brush my hair.
All right, I will bid you goodbye and thank you again so much. That's brilliant.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.